election headquarters, and this is Politics on Your Side. We have a big show for you today. We'll be analyzing this week's Democratic presidential candidate debates in Miami. 20 candidates vying to get the attention of Democratic voters without alienating Republicans, whose votes they'll need in the general election. Here to help us break it all down is our expert panel, including Democratic State Representatives Anna Eskamani of Orlando and Adam Hattersley of Central Hillsborough County, and Republican State Representative Mike Beltran of Southeastern Hillsborough. Mike is outnumbered this week because it is a Democratic debate week. The biggest issue for voters in 2018 was health care, and it helped Democrats take back the U.S. House. But the candidates for the party's nomination don't seem to agree on how to provide health care to the American people.
People who have health care under Medicare for All will have no premiums, no deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. Yes, they will pay more in taxes, but less in health care for what they get.
That to return dignity to the middle class, they have to have insurance that is covered and they can afford it.
Now, Anna, this really highlights the clash between the moderates and the progressives. You got Bernie's Medicare for All and Biden's Make Obamacare Work.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to strike a balance between the two and what's actually possible in this moment of time. I really appreciate the candidates that actually had a plan to get there. I was disappointed in Bernie Sanders because he's talked about this for such a long time, and yet when asked to be explicit, he couldn't do it. And so there were some really great examples. Chris and Gilbert, for example, kind of mapped out like a way to get to a place where everyone can have access to health care, but it's not happening overnight. You know, it takes time. So I really appreciate the candidates that actually painted that possibility. Yeah,
and Warren is known for being very specific and wonky on her policy positions. Adam, you and I were just talking about our time abroad, yours as a veteran. Thank you for your service.
Of course.
Mine as a civilian. I spent 5 years in London. You got the National Health Service there, but I had private health care insurance on top of the NHS, so I had both options, and that's kind of how it works there. I'm not sure all of the Democrats really understand what they're asking for. If they start taking away people's health care, it could be Obamacare all over again, angering voters, and that may not be what they want. Don't they just need an option for a single payer?
I think that's a great point. And the Medicare for All, in my opinion, I believe does go a little bit too far. And it does have to be a balance between the public and private. I know John Delaney and Mayor Pete Buttigieg mentioned once you're able to bring on a program like that, a public program, just having lower premiums overall, people will start to naturally choose those solutions just to save themselves money, and it will start to naturally phase out. I know some of the other candidates had a 3 to 4 year plan to immediately cut private insurance. I personally don't think that would work. And keeping that choice available for people to use their private insurance if they want it and if they want to keep it, they should have that choice to do so. But there should be a robust public option as well to ensure that every person, every American does have health care.
Yeah. Mike, this is right in your wheelhouse, man. Now's your chance to go after it. I mean, how did Democrats sell this issue to Republican voters?
Well, they didn't sell it to me last night. Bernie Sanders, he was very honest. I'll give him that. He said he's going to raise taxes on middle-class Americans in order to pay for single-payer health care.
And that your health care costs would go down.
I know my taxes are going up. I don't know what this single-payer system is going to look like if we're going to be able to get timely, quality care with the doctors that we want to see. And, you know, it's going to be expensive. He wants to eliminate co-pays. Well, co-pays should be manageable. It should be accessible, but it should make you not incur unnecessary services. It shouldn't be prohibitive, but there should be some shared costs so that people incur those economic signals like you would in any other transaction, buying a car, a house, clothing, food. All of these are
So you're not making frivolous trips to the doctor?
So you're not making frivolous trips. Yeah,
fair
absolutely.
Enough.
And then, you know, the idea that, you know, that they want to save money on prescription drugs. Well, we had a bill, HB 19, in the legislature this session to allow imports from Canada where they sell the drugs cheaper and import those into the United States. And it passed and it was signed into law by the governor, but there was certainly some resistance from the left on this, more so even than from the pharmaceutical companies. And so I would hope folks would join in efforts like that. I think that's going to make a big impact in reducing the costs.
One common ground that all the candidates shared there was calling out insurance companies, and I think that's really critical, and I feel it's something that Republicans probably agree with too, is that insurance companies haven't given too much power to their major political donors as well, and that's a dangerous conflict of interest.
There are scores of civilized nations across the world that have universal health care. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can model a program based on other programs that work around the world. When you were in London, were you able to go to the doctor that you wanted to see?
Yeah, I was, and honestly, taxes plus healthcare there, healthcare being free, it really was almost about what I pay here, if not less, actually.
And so the model exists, and not just in England, but in Canada, in France, in Switzerland, in Sweden. There are plenty of places that are just as civilized, just as democratic, where these programs do exist. We just have to be able to look at the big picture and not worry about the insurance company's bottom line or the farmer's bottom line.
People don't travel there. People come in greater numbers to the United States for medical care because we have a free market, we have a capitalist system, and we have the best medical care in the world. Whether it's cheap, it could be a lot cheaper if we would pass some of this legislation. And as for the idea, that our political system is captured either by the PBMs or by the pharmacy companies, look at all the things that we did with the PBMs and the pharmacies and a lot of the other lobbyists kind of crying in Tallahassee.
I would argue that only the people in the top end are coming here. The people, like the average everyday middle class, European or lower class Europeans, definitely not coming here.
Right? We have the best quality, and that's because of our system here.
When we return, we will break down the first Democratic presidential primary debates this week in Miami. 20 candidates, 2 nights, 60 seconds each. Everybody trying to get a word in. It's like Thanksgiving dinner at my family's house. We'll be right back. Metrics are good right now, but if there's a downturn before the election, President Trump could be in trouble. Still, Democrats this week were making the point that it is good, but only for a select few.
When you've got a government, when you've got an economy that does great for those with money and isn't doing great for everyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple.
For too long, the rules have been written in the favor of the people who have the most and not in favor of the people who work the most, which is why I am proposing that we change the tax code. So for every family that is making less than $100,000 a year, they will receive a tax credit that they can collect up to $500 a month.
On a bold proposal there. Your thoughts on that, but more broadly, how Democrats make the case on the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the points are valid in the sense that we have a strong economy right now, but not for everyone. I mean, I know in our district in Central Florida, I'm sure it's the same in Tampa Bay, you have stagnant wages. You have an affordable housing crisis where folks are making minimum wage, having to work 108 hours a week just to afford a 1-studio apartment. These are the crises that we have here in the state of Florida. And so I think the points they're making of, listen, unemployment is down, but the fact is that working people are still struggling, and we have to come with solutions to make life better. I think that message was important to share because we had a huge lack of understanding working people in the last presidential election. So those points being made this past week were important for Democrats to do, and I think they did it well.
Adam?
I agree that the economy right now is strong for certain groups and certain companies and certain people. Wages coming out of college for starting jobs are around mid-30,000 right now. Coming out of college in 1980, wages were about mid-30,000. But inflation, has obviously gone up, and cost of living has dramatically increased. Yeah, the unemployment rate is relatively low, but it's going to be when somebody's working 2 to 3 jobs to pay for what should be covered by one good-paying, normal American job.
Mike?
Well, look, I think the stock market's certainly up, as even the Democratic candidates conceded, and we also have a lot of good benchmarks showing that that other folks, for example, minority unemployment is at record lows. So unemployment's down, the stock market's up, property values are good. It's actually hard to find good property. It's hard to find good employees because we're doing so well, and that's not the only thing that Trump has done well. Look at on foreign policy, we've had a lot of progress.
Bigger issue is I think a lot of those middle class people used to be the wheelhouse for Democrats, and they have kind of lost that cohort, and how they get it back I think will be a big thing on whether or not they can win this next election. Perhaps the second most divisive topic in American politics today, immigration.
We would not build walls. We would not put kids in cages. In fact, we would spare no expense to reunite the families that have been separated.
Interesting sort of exchange there. A lot of people thought good night for Castro, bad night for Beto. This was in response to that horrific picture of Valeria and Oscar Martinez, the father and the 2-year-old daughter who drowned in the Rio Grande trying to cross into America. Anna, how did Democrats get more people in America to care about the plight of those people, but also respect the laws of America?
Yeah, I mean, I think personal storytelling is so important. We had a huge debate this past session on immigration, one that I do feel like, as a daughter of immigrants, we lost. I mean, it was really painful to be a part of a debate that, from my perspective, really isolates a lot of immigrants. And I was really hopeful to see the conversation this past week be grounded on immigrants are people, no matter what their documentation status is. No human is illegal, and trying to paint a picture where we can kind of rebuild our country again, not be so divided on immigration, but actually look towards comprehensive reform that doesn't criminalize folks just for existing.
Adam, we need to get back to the ideals of what it means to be an American. My family came from Europe, 100 years ago, 80 years ago. I wouldn't be here if the current immigration laws were in effect when my ancestors came to the United States. We were built by immigrants. We were built on immigrants. Immigrants have fought our wars. Immigrants have invented and built America, and we need to remember that. It's a core value that we had for most of our history until the last decade or two. And finding ourselves again is going to be key to turning over and turning a new leaf in 2020.
Well, I want to be very clear about what asylum is, because that's what they're talking about when they're saying that the kids are in the cages and the kids are being separated. These are folks who are awaiting adjudication for asylum. So what is asylum? Asylum is not conditions are bad in my country, I want to come to America. Asylum is I'm being persecuted because of my race, religion, my political beliefs, something like that. So we would look at that case individually and try to make a prompt determination of whether that person is being singled out and persecuted, and if they are, they're entitled to asylum. But that's a very small portion of the immigration. That's 30,000 people a year are coming in through asylum, give or take, compared to millions who are coming across the border.
Coming up, we break down more of the debates, including abortion rights, also a local case getting a national attention. An alleged domestic violence victim steals her husband's guns, why many, including some on our panel, are calling for her charges to be dropped. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Politics on Your Side. Joining me today to break down the Democratic presidential debates and some other issues, Democratic State Representatives Anna Eskamani and Adam Hattersley, and Republican State Representative Mike Beltran. If the second most divisive issue in America is immigration, the most divisive issue also popped up in these debates.
I am the only candidate here who has passed a law protecting a woman's right of reproductive health and health insurance.
I just want to say there's 3 women up here that have fought pretty hard for a woman's right to choose. So I'll start with that.
Isn't the Democratic candidate going to be vulnerable on this issue on the other side of the aisle?
No, actually, the majority of Americans do support access to a safe legal abortion. They do not want to see Roe v. Wade be overturned. Of course, you need standards and guidelines set by medical experts, but politically motivated restrictions like the bans we've seen in Georgia, Alabama, and other states across the country have raised the alarm. And even in Florida, there was no abortion restriction that passed this session. Floridians don't have an appetite for it. We'd rather focus on prevention, access to sex ed, and preventative measures.
Adam? I agree. Politicians should certainly not be involved in those kind of decisions. When it comes to the third trimester abortions, most cases it's when the health of the mother is at risk. It's a very traumatic decision. At this point, typically baby names have been picked out. This is not a choice thing. This is a medically necessary thing. It's a horrible thing that happens, but it's for a medical reason, and the government should not be anywhere near making those decisions when it's a medical and a medically necessary
But again,
decision.
let me challenge you there. I believe that bill in Virginia that was introduced would have allowed abortions even under the mental health of the woman being harmed in a way, so that could be a reason for her to have an abortion in the third trimester.
Under very extreme circumstances. I think it's important for listeners to know that 90% of abortion services are in the first trimester. Yeah. Anything beyond first trimester, to Adam's point, it's going to be really tragic circumstances. Nobody wants to end a pregnancy late in their term.
Mike?
Well, look, like my pro-life views are well known. I'm not going to belabor them here. Here's what I'll say. For a long time, the pro-choice lobby was talking about safe, legal, and rare. What we've seen in the last year is some of the northern states have been trying to expand abortion rather than reduce it. So the one thing I saw last night that I can actually agree with is one of the governors was bragging about he had reduced abortions. Colorado, they had reduced abortions 65% through things like providing contraception and counseling and that type of health care, which is exactly what we should be focusing on. We should be providing contraception, sex ed, things like that, so we can reduce the abortions. But what scares me is some of these states, they're trying to expand it to abortion on demand, as if abortion were some good thing. I hope we would all agree that at best it's a necessary evil.
Well, now a domestic abuse case in Polk County getting national attention. Taylor Irby separated and filed for divorce from her husband Joseph 6 months ago and got a restraining order against him. 2 weeks ago, he was charged with domestic violence, aggravated battery for allegedly trying to run her off the road and ramming her car. The next day, after his bond hearing, she went to his place, took his guns, brought them to police, and admitted to police she did what she did in fear for her life. She was charged with armed burglary, spent 6 days in jail. Hillsborough State Attorney Andrew Warren says the law doesn't have the teeth to protect women.
There's no effective mechanism, as we've talked about, to make sure that people who are not allowed to own guns don't own guns. So if someone's going to hide a gun that they have, or they're going to loan it to somebody else and then get it back, it's really hard to enforce that. That's why we need other strategies in place, like universal background checks.
Anna, you've been very outspoken that these charges should be dropped.
Yeah, I have, absolutely. I mean, the reality is that our judicial system for a very long time has not served survivors of domestic violence well. And when I saw this pop up in my Twitter feed last week, I jumped to action and wrote a letter to the state attorney of Polk County asking him not to prosecute Taylor Irby, because the reality is that she was doing what she thought was the right thing to do. A judge had already said that her estranged husband could not own firearms. She knew he possessed them. And she did something to protect herself and her children after telling a judge that she felt like her life was at risk. And so her decision to do that was one that police could have had discretion on deciding what action to take, and they should have supported the survivor, provided her with resources so that she does feel safe along with her children, not incarcerate her.
Adam?
Criminalizing a victim is never the right answer. And as lawmakers, it's our job to find where our laws do not fit and be able to fix them and correct them. Right now, for example, if she had waited at home with those firearms and shot her husband when he got home, under stand your ground laws, she would be in zero trouble with the law whatsoever. There's problems on both sides of that entire situation, but no one should be criminalized for protecting themselves and ultimately following the order of a judge of who should have a firearm.
Well, look, there was a lawful order out that prohibited this gentleman from keeping his guns. I went ahead and looked at the charges filed against the estranged wife, and she was charged with two things. She was charged with grand theft of a firearm, and she was charged with armed burglary. Well, let's look at grand theft of a firearm. Grand theft means that you stole something with the intent to either deprive someone of their right, or that you were going to appropriate it to yourself. She did neither. She didn't intend to, he didn't have the right to keep those guns, and she didn't intend to appropriate them to herself. She brought them to the police station. And then armed burglary, well, to commit burglary, you have to have an intent to commit an offense when you enter the premises. Obviously, there was no predicate offense. And then the second thing is about armed burglaries. It has to be a dangerous weapon. There was nothing that I saw in any of the reports that I looked at that this weapon was loaded at the time that she appropriated, and therefore dangerous. So it's a real stretch of the statutes, just from a legal perspective.
And a lot of people are confused about that armed burglary because she didn't have a gun, but she was leaving with the gun.
Yeah, and that's a stretch.
Yeah,
the statute says that if you become armed during the burglary, that's armed burglary. I think that's a stretch. And then, but then the next layer of this is prosecutors have discretion. Police have discretion.
Absolutely.
Folks should be exercising their discretion.
I think this sounds like this is something that we can all agree on.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for joining my panel this week. It was an excellent discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We'll be right back.